Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's special episode of the Maritime Morning Brief, brought to you by the Marine Exchange of Puget Sound. I am your host today, Sarah, here with Executive Director Patrick Gallagher.
Good morning, everybody.
And today we are welcoming Sam Kaplan, China trade policy expert of over 30 years, author, and current director for the Center of Excellence for Global Trade and Supply Chain Management. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, welcome, Sam.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you. Where do we want to start? There's so many places.
I have a lot of questions. And big reason we are really excited to have you, Sam, is because there's so many questions about trade policy. I know you've written about it. I know you have some strong opinions and a lot of expertise. And there's so much confusion and uncertainty right now. And I think misinformation that we're very intent on finding somebody who could maybe cut through some of that for us and talk about how it's going to impact Washington State. Obviously, we're a trade association for the maritime industry, and so we're interested in seeing where this is all headed, what the impacts are, things like that. So I'm just going to jump into it. Something that you wrote about quite a bit, a message that you've provided is that you say that Chinese prosperity, economic prosperity, is good for the entire world. What do you mean by that, and how did you come to that conclusion?
Well, yeah, I've been working with China for many, many years. When I was 10 years old, so though 30 years ago means I'm very, very young still. So over the last 40 years, probably 1 billion people have come out of absolute poverty in China, but also in other parts of the world, and that's a good thing. So I am very proud to be a citizen of the United States of America, but I also recognize people are humans all over the world. So if there's people suffering less and doing better in China and in India and in Indonesia and in Vietnam and other places, that's a good thing for the world. It's actually a good thing for the United States as well. It's more people for us to sell to. It's more people for us to buy from. There's more people doing research. Just in the last few years, China has really increased their ability to develop high technology medicine, which will be a beneficial thing for the rest of the world. The more people coming up with remedies for ailments that humans have, the better. So it's a good thing in general. That doesn't mean I don't have concerns about China, and that we don't need to deal with certain things about China, or that they don't have overcapacity issues, which they even sort of now admit internally, and that cause difficulties for the rest of the world economically. But it's definitely a good thing that more Chinese are not starving, have prosperity, can do good things for their families. That's always going to be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, global trade seems like the great unlock for the world, and it's not by any means perfect. I mean, there are winners and losers, but I mean, I've heard you make the point that in the last 70 years, it's been remarkable how much global trade has lifted this world out of poverty and created prosperity for so many people. It's literally saved lives. It's unlocked an incredible era for us. That seems to be changing right now, to say the least. So I know you wrote your book, I believe it was 2021 when it was published. Catch us up on where we're at right now and what the landscape is looking like.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, maybe kind of go back to your point about things have gotten better. Really, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and when you really start to see the data take effect around 1870, we've been on a 150-year winning streak, human beings, for the most part. And things have gotten better. So from 2,000 years, if you look at GDP levels and GDP per capita levels, it was just a flat line. And then around 1870, you really started to see it spike up. In fact, it started to go up a little bit 1,500 years ago, and then about 1,000 years ago, it started to go up a little bit. But we really started to see a line going straight up as in 1870 when the Industrial Revolution really started to affect all sorts of things around the world. And as a consequence of the economy growing, that meant most things for most people were getting better. Mm-hmm. So you saw absolute poverty coming down in the world. You saw literacy going up. You saw more people getting an education. You saw life expectancy going up. All the things that we care about. We care about economic growth, but we care about economic growth because it helps things that we all want and need and makes our lives better. So you saw all of our lives getting better. And that was especially true the last 70 years, which have been really the most prosperous times in human history. That was at the same time you started seeing globalization really take off even more. You saw global trade taking off more. The very things that people have been complaining about the last 20 or so years, 30 years, 25 years, that was actually the most successful time in human history when things got better and better for everybody. And that includes here in America. So a lot of people think, oh, things got better in China, or they got better in Japan or South Korea, but not here. But if you look at data for the United States, things got better here as well. You can look at absolute poverty levels fell tremendously in the United States. You can look at all sorts of other measures. There was a brief blip during the pandemic era when you had life expectancy actually go down in the United States. But since then, things are going up again. So the United States has benefited from globalization and international trade as well. But like you say, things have been changing, and especially in the last 6 months or so since the new administration, but really even before then, people forget that the Biden administration continued the China tariffs that the Trump administration had put in place, and it had some other protectionist measures that it put in place. A lot of Buy American provisions were part of the Inflation Reduction Act, and as part of other bills that were passed by Congress and approved by the President Biden. So you already had some protectionism happening then, and it's amped up in the last number of months, especially with the tariff announcements. You said you're going to have a lot of questions about that. I have a lot of questions about that. For all I know, since we've been broadcasting, there have been more tariffs put in place. And so that's a big challenge. I hear people say this means that globalization is going away. You don't see that in the data, and I don't think that's what's going to happen. What we're going to see is that globalization is going to change. So most people, when they talk about globalization, are thinking about international trade. But globalization is really four things. It's international trade, the movement of goods. It's the movement of money. It's the movement of people. And it's the movement of ideas. And there's really no sign of any of those things slowing down. Some have leveled off international trade. So until the great financial crisis in 2007, 2008, generally international trade was going faster than GDP was. But since then, it's been about the same. Some years it's going faster, sometimes it's going slower. So they're both going about the same, but it's not going away. In fact, international trade itself, you keep seeing more international trade happening. It's just not growing consistently faster than GDP growth. Then secondly, there's money. There's a number of ways to measure that. You can look at FDI, you can look at foreign exchange. If you look at those figures, that's not changing either. Money continues to flow around the world at a higher and higher rate. And then third, people. At the moment in the United States, in Europe, and many other countries, there's a lot of backlash against immigrants. But if you look at the data, you see more and more people moving around the world. There's a great chart on ourworldindata.com where you can see that line going up. And by the way, again, I know there's a lot of concern about immigrants. I think in the future there'll be a great competition for immigrants because everybody's getting aging demographics, including in China. China has a very low fertility rate now, and they're in about 10 years from now really going to be having troubles with the aging population. The United States now also has a below fertility rate, below 2.1 fertility rate. Europe's had that for a while. Japan is famously has a shrinking population. Korea is, if it continues its current trends, it could just disappear as a country. The only places where you are not seeing below fertility rate, below replacement rate level of fertility rate is parts of India and then many parts of Africa. But even there, the fertility rate has come down. So eventually, everybody is going to want people to move to their countries. And I think you'll see a big competition for immigrants. So I think what we have seen now is going to change. So that's three things. So the movement of goods, the movement of money, and the movement of people. And then the fourth thing is the movement of ideas. That is not slowing down at all. The internet, it's easy for ideas to move around the world. I like to give a couple of different examples. One is during the Super Bowl, Kendrick Lamar performed at the halftime show. So that was, rap music, hip hop music, started in the Bronx in New York City. I'll actually be there in a week or so visiting family. And and that came from African American influences, but also influences from the Caribbean. And that show that was done in the halftime of the Super Bowl, that was broadcast to us through camera equipment from Japan and through audio equipment from France. So even the Super Bowl, the most American of institutions, is really a globalized thing. And then I was in New Orleans, one of my favorite places to travel to, in April for French Quarter Festival. It's all this great music, but they have this great food. And we had this great po' boy sandwich. Po' boy is a very famous New Orleans sandwich, right? The bread it was on was from a Vietnam bakery. A lot of Vietnamese Americans immigrated to New Orleans, and they live in East New Orleans, and they have this great bakery, the best bread for making po' boy sandwiches. So this most New Orleans, a United States city sandwich, great sandwich with Vietnamese bread, Vietnamese American bread. So it's a very globalized world. But you also see that with vaccines that were developed for COVID. Germany and the United States played a large role, the largest role in doing that, but the researchers were from other countries, from Turkey and from many other countries. If you look at the supply chain for vaccines, they're from all over the world. So it's a globalized world with ideas constantly moving around, and that'll continue to happen unless there's Armageddon and we have no communications anymore.
Right. I was studying some of the things you wrote about China's GDP growth, and it's staggering, double-digit GDP growth sustained for many years. And concurrently with the rise of authoritarianism, with a new regime that's put in place that doesn't look like it's slowing anytime soon. So could you make an argument that authoritarianism is good for business?
People make that argument, but if you look at the data again, it's not really accurate. In fact, I write a weekly newsletter called International Need to Know, not to advertise my newsletter, but
Please do.
Yeah.
but this week I'm actually writing about that yet again in the newsletter. In the past, there have been a number of studies that have shown that democracies grow on average faster than authoritarian autocracy governments. And China did have incredibly fast growth for 30 years, but so have a number of developing countries over the years. And in fact, China did great, and I'm very happy that they've brought all these people out of poverty. If you compare them to places like Taiwan and South Korea, they didn't really get higher GDP per capita compared to what those countries did. So China now is, I'm going to get this data wrong, but it's like 15,000 US dollars per capita GDP. So well below what the United States is. Taiwan and South Korea aren't at the level as the United States, but they're much closer. And if you look at their growth rates and their GDP per capita growth rates during their fast-growing periods, it's actually better than China's was during their fast-growing period. And in fact, China now is not a fast-growing economy. The last number of years, they claim about 5% annual growth every year. That's about as accurate as my predictions that the Seattle Mariners each year are going to win the World Series. So they juke the stats, as they used to say in The Wire. And they just announced 5.2% growth last quarter for this year. And that's probably not accurate as well. They have a growth rate goal of this year, 5% growth, and they'll get that, but it won't be real. In fact, last year they probably grew closer to the rate, maybe just a little bit lower than what the United States GDP growth rate was. So they has slowed down. We talk about the reasons why that's slowed down. But the other thing is, there's just what I'm going to write about in my newsletter this week. There's just another study done by a guy named, I think it's Chris Blotman from the University of Chicago, and two other economists whose names I don't remember. I apologize to those two other economists. And they looked at, again, comparing the growth rates of democracies with autocracies. Now, they do complicate the picture a little bit because democracies do outgrow what they term personalized autocracies. So a place where it's a single person who sort of personalized the dictatorship around him. A guy like Vladimir Putin would qualify that. There's a number of dictators in certain countries in Africa. And in the past, like Pinochet in Chile would be considered that. Then they call what they call institutional autocracies. These are places with more of an institutional bent, and it's not all around one single leader. And In the past, probably that's what you would call China. Now it might be a personalized one with Xi Jinping. But if you look at those kinds of autocracies, the democracies grow about the same, maybe just a little bit faster, but not really statistically significant. So in that sense, okay, maybe you want to be an autocracy, except as an autocracy, even in institutionalized autocracy, you're not growing faster than a democracy, and you don't have freedom. So why wouldn't anyone pick better growth than personalized autocracies and the same or maybe slightly bigger growth than institutionalized autocracies, but also freedom? Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that, as this study shows, lots of times personalized autocracies morph into personalized autocracies. Mm-hmm. So they might be more efficient as an institutional autocracy, but then eventually they become a personalized one, and then their economy really doesn't do as well. And that might be what we've kind of seen with China over the last 10 years, as Xi Jinping has consolidated power around himself. So, and that's not the only reason why their growth has slowed down, but that might be a reason for it. So I think when people say that it's better to be an authoritarian power and because you'll grow faster, that's not necessarily true. There might be some helpfulness from it early on in your development stage. Mm-hmm. I mentioned South Korea and Taiwan earlier. They both were authoritarian governments, or at least autocracy governments. But then as they reached a certain GDP per capita, around $5,000 GDP per capita, they started to liberalize politically. And they continue to grow and do well, and people have more freedom. Individuals have more income than you would have in China. So the traditional pattern before China was for countries to be somewhat authoritarian and grow economically, get to a certain stage, and then start to liberalize politically. China's upended that, and so we'll see what happens with countries now that are on the same kind of growth path that Taiwan and South Korea were. I go to Vietnam at least once a year, and they are now just getting to $5,000 GDP per capita. It'll be interesting to see if they follow South Korea and Taiwan's path and start to liberalize politically, or if they follow this new model that China has created, where it becomes even more authoritarian and continues to try and grow economically. Sorry for the long answer.
No, this is fantastic. Awesome. So yeah, it's greatly appreciated. You had a graph in your book about productivity, American worker productivity versus Chinese. American productivity was quite high, and I think number one, at least on your chart there, and China was significantly lower. With this protectionism that's going on now, tariffs and other types of protectionism, do you see that reversing? Do you think American workers will decline in productivity?
It's a great question. I think my chart was a little more complicated in the book. What happened was Chinese productivity rates decreased from a higher level, and America's had sort of developed country productivity rates the last 20, 30 years. Well, it's a great question, how tariffs will affect that. My big concern about tariffs beyond I'm not someone in favor of protectionist trade policy is that I can see doing tariffs on certain goods that we deem are strategic and that we need to have for national security reasons, and we want to start making those kinds of things, those kinds of products. China has definitely done that. A lot of times their protectionism is non-tariff barrier protectionism, so it's hard to get things into the country, or they force you to give up do technology transfers or a variety of other methods to make it difficult to get into their market, subsidies as well. The problem with just putting tariffs on a bunch of different goods is it's going to make it more efficient. The global economy is going to be less efficient, so the world is going to grow at a slower rate. And all those good things that I talked about earlier, absolute poverty and all these other things coming down, won't improve as well as they had in the past. And the other problem with trying to do that around strategic goods is so far the Trump administration has not paired policies to help build up these strategic industries in the United States with tariffs on goods. They've just put tariffs on all sorts of goods, including on allies and potential adversaries and competitors. So there's no really strategic approach to trying to build up those industries. So, for example, in the Biden administration, the Congress passed with the Biden administration's leadership the CHIPS Act, which was trying to build up the our semiconductor industry in the United States. And indeed, a lot of infrastructure was built. TSMC, which is the large semiconductor company out of Taiwan, has done 2 plants already. I think they have another third one in the works. Intel started to do something in Ohio, which I think has gotten slowed down a little bit. And there were all these sorts of incentives to have this happen. A lot of that's being pulled back in the Trump administration or in the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA Act. There's a lot of incentives to build batteries and to do a variety of other things around clean tech. The Trump administration is not interested in clean tech at all, and there seems to be sort of a intrinsic dislike of things like solar power and electric works. And Trump has talked about, we got to build coal and everything. I know it's easy to be concerned about that for climate change reasons, for good reason, and I'm concerned about that for climate change reasons. But there's also good reasons to be concerned about that for national security reasons. We're entering an electrified world, whether the current administration believes it or not, or certain folks in the Republican Party believe it or not, because solar power and batteries have come way down in price and have become much more efficient. So you're seeing more and more electric power happening around the world from solar and wind, but really solar is really taking off nowadays. And just as important, battery have become efficient and less expensive, and that's storage. So people talk about, okay, what do you do at nighttime? The sun doesn't shine at night, so you're not getting solar power. But now that you can start to build storage, then you get that advantage. So we all talk about wanting to be leaders in AI. That takes a lot of energy. So if you're a country that's building all this storage power using batteries and all this generation of electricity through solar and wind and nuclear and other ways that are clean, but also just cheaper to do than coal and gas nowadays, then you're going to be a leader in AI. And then if you look at militarily, maybe the biggest thing we've seen in recent years in the war in Ukraine is drones, the power of drones. Well, a drone is just essentially a flying battery, right? You're not going to have gasoline-powered drones. They won't be able to go nearly as far. It won't work. It adds all the weight to putting the gasoline and everything into it. So drones are really important for military, as are a lot of other things. Robotics is starting to take off. That's all battery-driven. So we need to be able to be successful in building batteries. But although we have tariffs on other countries, on all sorts of things, including batteries, we've done nothing really now in the Trump administration. In fact, we've backtracked from the previous administration's efforts to become big battery manufacturers. So it's a problem economically, it's a problem national security-wise and strategy-wise. And I haven't even gotten into all the uncertainty when you're putting tariffs on and then you're taking them off or you're delaying them. And my personal pet peeve is he'll announce an agreement. We have an agreement with the UK, or a couple of weeks ago we haven't announced an agreement with Vietnam. There is no agreement. The only thing was in the agreement is in his Truth Social post. That's the entirety of the agreement, and that is not a trade agreement. And so we really have no trade agreements at the moment, not even with the ones that have been announced.
Right. So this is like something that keeps coming up, is whether we can try and see where this is going or not, all the impact that all the uncertainty has on it. So like how are you even keeping up with this, or what's the outlook, or what are those impacts that you're seeing of that uncertainty, anything like that? Because that's what we have been constantly hearing, is just we don't even know because it's all so uncertain.
Yeah, uncertainty is a huge problem. Like you guys, I talk to shipping companies and supply chain companies all the time, just about every day, and things have slowed down tremendously for them. So that obviously affects jobs. It will affect, I think today, I believe, I didn't get a chance to read the article before I came down, but I believe inflation went up a little bit. We're starting to see inflation finally creep up from the what's happening with tariffs. And it's difficult to plan. There's a company, we do a fall supply chain study abroad program at our centers. We have students follow products and supply chain to and from Vietnam. And we don't just go to Vietnam. We visit companies here doing stuff. And there's a company we visit here, and so I know the trade compliance person there, and their hair's on fire. They're every day having to deal with something different. Maybe that'll be the one benefit you'll see is companies are going to have to hire a lot more trade compliance staff. So that if you're looking for work, maybe that's where you can find work in the future. But then certainty is huge. You can't plan. Companies plan, as you all know, many years in advance, and certainly for supply chain stuff. So a company that's making any kind of a product, they're looking out a number of years of where they're going to source different components for the product, where they're going to manufacture the product. Any product of any complication, you're sourcing stuff from many different places. It's just does not make sense in the modern world to make everything in one place. So even if you're bringing manufacturing back to the United States, you're still going to be getting some of the components from different places. Now, for certain military and national security things, you might try and make sure you're sourcing, nearshoring some of that, or getting it from strategic allies. But again, we've put tariffs on everybody, so I'm not sure who our allies are at this point, right? So it's a huge problem, and then certainly means you can't make plans. Another company I talked to, I was talking to them a year ago, they're figuring out where they're going to go for their next manufacturing hub, and maybe pivoting a little bit from Asia. I'll be curious to talk to them. I'll be seeing them next month. What's happened to those plans, and if they can make any plans at all. How do you make a plan right now?
My fear is that what's happening right now around the world, people are getting into rooms and figuring out how to get around the United States, which I believe will establish a whole new order. Like this will be the mark. This will be the before and after. Like we'll have. What did Trump call it? It was the day. Why am I missing?
The Liberation Day.
Liberation Day.
Yeah.
I believe will be a historical moment, the before and after of when all this happened. And I think what I keep seeing is people are mistakenly thinking like everything's okay because I go to the grocery store and I still have a job or whatever. I think it's going to take a long time to unwind. We're not even going to understand what happened for another year or more. We're going to have to do a lot of forensics on it post and try and figure out how to put this back, reassemble it. That's my fear right now is many deals are being made and we're no longer in those rooms. Like we're alienating too many people too quickly.
I completely agree with you. And I think you point out what maybe the biggest danger is you don't see there's a complete wreck of the economy in the short term, and so you don't see a sudden change to policy. You're seeing a slow degradation of the economy, a slow slog into more and more insignificance. I was talking to a friend the other day who was, I guess there's been some photos of people protesting ICE. And they stand in front of military vehicles. And so people are comparing that to Tank Man in China during Tiananmen Square, where famously this one unknown individual who's disappeared since then was standing in front of a line of tanks. Most people see the photo, they see him in front of one tank. But if you get wide shots of that, it's actually a whole bunch of tanks are coming in to massacre at least 1,000 people, probably more, in Tiananmen Square and around China. I don't think it's an apt comparison of people protesting ICE to that. Not that the people who are standing in front of these vehicles aren't brave. I think they are. And I think they have good reasons to protest what ICE is doing. But, by evidence of our doing this podcast, we are not China, not even close to it yet. And I don't think we probably are going to become China for a variety of reasons. But we do have a good chance of becoming early 20th century Argentina, which 100 years ago, Argentina was one of the biggest economies in the world and appeared to be on a trajectory where they're going to be just an important country and very developed and doing just as well as the United States. In fact, I believe their GDP per capita was, if not at our size, not very far behind the United States. But instead, they started doing a bunch of protectionist policies. A bunch of populists were elected over the years. And basically, the last 100 years, Argentina has went from one economic crisis to another, and all sorts of political instability, and also different populists being elected to this day. And now they elected a libertarian, and actually, at the moment, they're doing pretty well. We'll see if that continues. If his policies work in the long term, they at least have had some help in the short term. Whether they're going to be successful in the long term, I don't know. But my big worries will be more like Argentina, where over a couple of decades we just get worse and worse and things go bad. So yeah, I think you identified maybe my biggest worry for America's future.
I seem to remember Argentina sustained a long period of hyperinflation, where there were days, I heard stories where there were days where, you just couldn't even determine a price on common goods from week to week. You have no idea what anything really costs. And obviously that's very disruptive for a society, and it takes a long time to repair. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they tried different currencies. They would repeg a new currency, and that failed over and over again. I know we have the dollar, the world's reserve currency. That's a huge advantage, but still, I can foresee a period where inflation takes root once again, and we sort of got it under control from what we were experiencing a year or two ago. Seemed to be on the right path, but I'm worrying that cost inflation is coming because of tariffs. There is this mistake I keep reading and seeing that about who actually pays the tariffs. Can you please just dispel this, officially? Like, who pays tariffs and how does it work?
Well, I'm not an official, so I can't do it officially. I wish I was. You wouldn't have these tariffs. But the company is importing the components, or the goods are paying the tariffs. So, and that's why also you've actually seen over the last 2 years before 2025, you actually saw manufacturing activity going up. You're seeing it coming down. That's partly because of tariffs, because about 50% of what we import are components then to be assembled or manufactured here. So if I'm Acme Inc., the Coyotes company, I'm importing some component to make something to get the Roadrunner with. I pay a tariff on that, so it's more expensive, and so my good that I'm then assembling here or manufacturing here becomes more expensive, or I may not be doing it as much because it's just not affordable for me to do that. So it's the companies that are importing these goods and are paying the tax on it. So that company that I was talking about with the trade compliance person, they've got to pay when it comes into customs. They got to pay on the product that they're importing in the United States, or in some cases the component into the United States. They've got to pay the tariff on that. Now, to be fair, last quarter, I just saw this morning as well. I think we got about $50 billion more in tariff-related revenue than we did for the same quarter last year. So you're having a little bit of impact on the budget deficit, but that could change. You're talking about how creative people are in other countries trying to deal with that. So are supply chain people here. Something I've really learned from watching them and meeting with them all the time is they deal with these things and figure out ways to get their components from different places or ship them different ways to try and get them here as quickly and as affordably as possible. A great example of that during the pandemic, when container rates skyrocketed by about 10 times, companies were chartering ships to get around that. Or another company I know, they made something in Vietnam, then they trucked it through China and then went to a port in Russia and then went out from Russia to where it was much cheaper to come out of. That worked until Russia invaded Ukraine, and they had to come up with another method. But these guys are really, really creative and really smart in trying to figure out ways to get around barriers and problems and policy issues that governments around the world put in front of them, where different things happen, weather-related and other things happen to them. So I think you'll see the globalization continue to change. I completely agree with you. I think you're going to see other countries. You already have been seeing other countries come up with different alliances, and it's going to change how the world works. it's going to make it more difficult for the Puget Sound area to compete because our ports for decades and decades had a geographical advantage. As Japan grew, and then South Korea and Taiwan, now Vietnam and Indonesia, and of course China, we're geographically close to those places compared certainly to the East Coast of the United States or the Southeast of the United States. In the case of Japan, South Korea, and China, we're closer than the Southern California ports.
Mm-hmm.
But as these things are moving to other places, we're not going to have that geographic advantage anymore. We're going to have to work harder. So when I see people in Washington, D.C., not helping our ports and the companies that are reliant on our ports, I'm thinking, well, that's going to be a lot of jobs that could go away. And when I see Washington state officials similarly maybe not doing stuff, that because we have to work harder now. We didn't have to work that hard in many ways for 40 years, but now we do. Or local officials in Seattle or King County or in Pierce County and other places, they're really missing what is happening globally, and that we actually have to support our ports at a higher level than we used to, and our port-related industries at a higher related level than we used to.
We are taking that snippet out and then running that like as a teaser. That I think that's perfect.
Well,
the way you said it is exactly right on.
That is something. It's something we've been talking about so much. I mean, we were just discussing it. A state maritime strategy. We're losing business to other ports, even along the West Coast, but even to the East Coast now for Savannah. These kinds of things. So, how do we combat that from your perspective here in Washington? And then also, how do we do that in this like uncertain tariff time? Like, what should our local Washington maritime workers be doing about this? What can we do? What can we try and get the state to do? It's like a huge question, but just thoughts.
It is a question. You probably have better answers than me because you're really working on these kind of issues intimately. So I'll be curious to hear your ideas as well. But a couple things. One, the United States doesn't have a federal freight policy and never really has, where a place like Canada does. And you're talking about, we're losing market share. We lose market share to Prince Rupert up in Canada, partly because they've have a conscious policy to try and help and make sure rail lines and trucks can get into the inner part of the country easily and then down in the United States. We don't have anything like that. And when we're thinking about both rail and truck, there's not a policy to try and make sure our rail lines are efficient to get things or try and give them more expansion. Same thing with trucks. My occupational hazard is I read this morning about how we're closing northbound I-5.
Yes.
My wife and I were talking about this. Her first thing, and this was the second thing I thought about, is, it's going to be difficult to get back from the Mariner game this Saturday, or when we come back from our trip to the East Coast, when we come back from the airport. But really the first thing I thought about is, oh, geez, it's going to make it even more difficult for the freight coming through. So when we get stuck in traffic, it sucks. It's horrible. But also your goods are getting stuck in traffic as well, and that's expensive. And you may not be thinking about that, but when you don't get that faucet you ordered to come to your home, or that book that you ordered, or whatever it might be, it's because we've made it more difficult for freight to get around and for people to get around. So the federal government should really be looking at a national freight strategy to try and make it easier to get things around and make it more efficient. And I'll come back to the state, because related to that point is something that a book called Abundance that I read earlier this year by Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein talks about how it's very inefficient to do state capacity stuff, government stuff, and it's true. In fact, you said my book came out in 2021. I have a chapter in my book that talks about the infrastructure, and I talk about what we need to do to deal with China. One of the things is we need to become more efficient and better at dealing with infrastructure. So I was 4 years ahead of Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, much more famous than me, much more intelligent than me, but I was ahead of them on this issue. Because it costs 2 to 3 times more to build infrastructure in the United States than it does in Europe and Japan, with no commensurate benefits to either labor or the environment. Labor is protected probably better in Europe. The environment is protected just as well in Japan and in Europe as it is in the United States. but it's 2 to 3 times cheaper to build infrastructure, and you do it much more quickly there than you do here. And that has all these other causes all these other problems in our country, including freight. So it's difficult to build port infrastructure. It's difficult to build roads. It's difficult to build transit. So we might be taking light rail or subways, and then that makes it easier for freight and other people who are driving to get to their places faster. Any infrastructure you think of, it costs too much to do and it takes too long to do it. So when I often will see people at the state level talking about, oh, we need to raise taxes, or we need to do this and this, and because we need to build up this infrastructure. So they're all talking about that side of the equation. They never talk about why does it take so long to do this construction and why does it cost so much to do it. And that's something that the state and city and other governments really need to concentrate on. And actually a good example of this is Texas is much more successful with solar power and battery storage being installed than California. And it's not because the governor and state legislature of Texas cares about climate change more than California. In fact, just the opposite. But their regulations make it much easier to build. So and that's for everything, including solar powers and batteries and everything else. And so consequently, you're getting much more solar power being built there, capacity being built there, and more batteries being built there. And so they're being more successful than California, where everybody thinks and knows they want to do this, but they can't. And you have similar problems in Washington State. For years and years, Washington State, one of our advantages in attracting companies is we had cheap and plentiful energy. And that's a lot due to hydropower. Mm-hmm. But it's not true anymore. I do some consulting on the side and was doing a project and talking to different folks. And it's difficult to recruit certain companies here because they can't get the power they need, whether in King County, Snohomish County, or other places. And of course, that's going to get even more difficult as you're seeing more data centers being built and things for AI. We need to make energy abundant, as Derek Thompson, Ezra Klein say in their book, the title of their book. And that means we need to tackle our regulatory regime that makes it so difficult to do. Sorry to go on a long rant about that, but I do talk about it in my book, and it's key to our ports being successful in the future.
That's a very good link. When I read that, I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then you got into, similarly, healthcare costs. Why is everything so much more expensive here with no commensurate benefit? Like, we have worse outcomes and we pay a lot more. Mm-hmm. I just one point, and this just really emphasizes what you just said. We lost the contract to build Washington State ferries in Washington State. That contract has gone to Eastern Shipbuilding in Florida.
Interesting.
Which tracks with what you're saying. We're just more expensive. We've created an environment that is expensive to live, expensive to work, get around. It's not optimized for this. We've created it, and we've regulated it to a degree that we've now are exporting, almost $1 billion to Florida. That really, if you want to talk about protectionism, that would be a good one, to keep our tax money in our state and employ our workforce and build it. So got a little upset about that one. I'm sort of hoping this isn't over, but I don't know where we're at, but I think that state ferry contract is gone, perhaps. So at least that's the way it's looking right now. So
yeah, and presumably, and I didn't follow that issue that closely. I saw the article in the paper, but yeah, presumably it's just because they were able to do it less expensively and probably faster. We need to build up our infrastructure in all sorts of ways. And you talk about how expensive it is here. That's true for housing as well, right? Mm-hmm. So it's Austin has grown tremendously in Texas, but they a number of years ago they made it easier to build housing, and so even though they have a lot more people living there, housing prices have been coming down, and for rents and prices of buying. It's frustrating. We just accept things that it just has to be this way. So it's like, oh, we have a bunch of people who moved into the Seattle area, Puget Sound area, so it's just going to become more expensive. It's not true, and we can change that by changing our regulations and making it easier to build. Same thing with I would love to make it easier to take transit different places. go to a Manor game and have, when they're doing badly, have a bunch of beers and drown my sorrows. But, I can't have all these beers because I got to drive home, right?
And like you said, it's taking so long to build that. Every single one of those projects is 2, 3, 5 years behind.
That's right.
So,
They're all behind schedule. That's a great point. It's and we just accept it like that's just the way it is, and we need to stop doing that. We need more people who are younger like you, because old people like me, I think we just get settled in our ways. We need young people to start trying to say, hey, we're not accepting this. This can change, and there's actual action plans to try and change it. There's people like in the abundance book saying, here's what the problems are. There's other people with specific plans to make it better. So yeah, get rid of me, old people like me, and get the young people like you doing stuff. You're middle. You're probably younger than me as well.
I'm
Low ground.
107.
Well, I'm 27, just to be clear.
Oh,
I feel like we have so many more questions, but actually, before we keep going, I want to hear about you and your background and how you got into the work you do now to inspire the youngins like me. I feel like that's kind of a subsector of the show. It's just like hearing people's story into their journey, and that kind of inspires people. So how did you get here? What was your pathway?
Well, so I going way back, I was a math major with an English minor.
Okay.
And then I eventually ended up working back in Washington, D.C. for a congressman doing trade and foreign affairs work. This was a million years ago when Washington, D.C. was a very different place than it is today, in all sorts of ways, politically and other ways as well. And so I really sensitive. I've always done international trade and foreign affairs type work and supply chain type stuff. I ended up working for a place called the Trade Development Alliance in Greater Seattle, which promoted the Seattle area internationally for trade and business, and eventually ran the organization, and then started some consulting, and then started running the Center of Excellence for Global Trade and Supply Chain Management. Way too long a name, but
It's a bit of a mouthful.
and I've been doing that a number of years. And I also do some consulting on the side. So yeah, I always tell people when I meet with young folks, and I do all the time in my center work, because we work with a lot of students, is don't worry what you major in too much. I was a math major and English minor, and I ended up doing all this foreign international work and trade work, supply chain work. Although it comes in handy, the math stuff always helps me in looking at stuff and having at least an idea of whether something might be right or not.
Right.
A lot of numbers out there. And the English part hopefully helped me with analysis, and I do all sorts of writing in both my career and my personal life. So yeah, an idea. I've done all sorts of different things. The book with China is, I got frustrated with the takes I was seeing around 2019 era, and like a lot of people also who had worked in China and with China for many, many years, I started to become concerned with what was happening in China, and I was getting concerned about what people were saying in the United States about China. So I decided to write a book. I outlined, my wife and I were actually in Italy, where we go every 7 years because our honeymoon was there. So I outlined most of it in a rooftop bar in Rome, to be honest with you. So yeah, the wine helped.
Oh yeah.
very
Most
helpful.
Definitely. Can you tell us a little bit about the Center of Excellence for Global Trade and Supply Chain Management? We always hear about the Center for Excellence, with Anne and the workforce development and all those things, but we don't actually hear about your Center of Excellence quite as much. So what goes on there?
Sure, yeah. Of course, our center is the most important center.
Oh, for
Anne's
sure.
is second most
Yeah.
important.
We heard that.
Yeah. No, there's 12 Center of Excellence, and we're all focused on different important industry sectors in Washington State. So ours is Global Trade and Supply Chain, Anne's is Maritime. There's one for aerospace, IT, agriculture, and the other important sectors of Washington State. And we work with industry and education on workforce development issues. We all do some similar things. We all do different things. I talked about earlier, we do a Follow Supply Chain Study Abroad program, where we work with 7 different community colleges and have the students follow products and supply chain to and from Vietnam to try and provide them a hands-on, practical look at how supply chains work. And these are people who are at the least probably studying business or might be specifically studying supply chains, sometimes some non-business folks. But they go to visit companies here in Washington State and then in Vietnam. The other thing that's interesting about it is we only charge the students $600. As you might guess, it costs more than $600 to go to places in Washington State and to
Yeah.
travel to Vietnam. So we're covering their airfare, their lodging, most of their food and ground transportation. So what we do is we have sponsors of the program as well from the private sector and from organizations. So the Port of Seattle, Linden Logistics, University of Washington, Transportation Clubs of Seattle and Tacoma, and others. So that means it's available to any kind of student. So that's one of the things we do. We also do a mentorship program where we match students from different colleges with mentors from industry, try and help them get a leg up and learn about the industry, and as well as community college students. If you're going to Duke or Harvard, you probably have a built-in network, but a community college student often won't, and so this also helps them to build up their networks. We also do economic data analysis, and which we try and publish every 2 years, about the size of the industry, how much it pays, where the jobs are located. And our shtick is that the global trade and supply chain industry in Washington State is bigger than Taylor Swift. If she sold out both T-Mobile Park and Lumen's Field, that would be not nearly as many people as actually work in the sector. There's actually more people working in our sector than in aerospace, even though you have Boeing located here. Not as many as in IT, but not that far behind. So it's a huge industry. It pays well. You often hear people talk about manufacturing jobs when we bring manufacturing jobs back. Even if you bring manufacturing back to Washington State and the United States, you won't bring that many jobs because it's more and more automated. Supply chain jobs are sort of like the manufacturing jobs were in the 1970s. They pay well, and you don't have to be a software programmer to get these jobs. You don't have to have a PhD to get these jobs, and you can get a 4-year degree, or in some cases just a certificate, and get a good paying job that gives you a good career and good family wages. So that's another reason why we should be concentrating on trying to support our supply chain industry and support ports, because it's the manufacturing jobs equivalent of 30 years ago. But you see lots of politicians talking about manufacturing. You don't see many making their stump speeches about supply chain and global trade jobs. Maybe we can all change that somehow.
We're trying. We are trying. And we are trying to make it put a more human face on it and try and get more stories out there and just demonstrate how attractive it can be, how you can make a really good life doing this work, and it is also very meaningful work. So we're trying. I feel like a lot of these types of jobs are hidden away. Really, it doesn't come out into the forefront very often. So we need to tell more of these kinds of stories, and that's a big thing for us. But we're fighting against really short attention spans. Yeah, and speaking of short attention spans, where are we at with TikTok? Do you think it's going to get banned? What's your opinion of TikTok and how it relates to, I guess, really the Chinese surveillance state and some of the things that have been lodged probably fairly against it here within this country, and the whole deal where a forced sale to a U.S. company. So just can you catch us up on where we're at with TikTok?
Sure. And before I say what I think about TikTok, it drives me crazy that what's happening now is against the law. So Congress passed a law overwhelmingly with like 300 votes or whatever it was, more than 300 votes. It was signed by the then president, and then it went before the Supreme Court, who unanimously ruled that it was a constitutional law. There is nothing in that law that allows for President Trump to do these 90-day extensions. I think we're now in the second 90-day extension, and to try and do these kinds of deals he's trying to do. So the first thing to know is whether you agree with the law or you're against the law, what we're doing now is against the law. It's very worrisome because it set up a huge precedent to try and break other laws in the United States and to give power to a president. And President Trump will not always be president. There'll be other people presidents. You're letting your next president, you set a precedent for them to do these kinds of things. So if, let's say, you're really conservative, you now set the precedent for somebody who's a very liberal president to do similar types of things like this. So it's a really, really bad thing that's happening. Now, on the TikTok law, I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm not a huge fan of TikTok either. I don't have the app on my phone because it would make my phone incredibly insecure, as you kind of intimated. China has repeatedly lied about this, but and the owners of ByteDance, which owns TikTok, they have lied about this. Is TikTok is much more intrusive than other social media apps. All of them are intrusive, and I'll get to that in a minute about what I think we should do rather than what the current law does. But TikTok actually records your keystrokes even when you're not on the app, when you're doing other things on your phone. So and people have done that. They reverse engineered the software to show that. So it's much more intrusive than others. And then China is ruled by an authoritarian government that does want to be more expansionist in the world. So I'm not a big fan of TikTok. That being said, I would have taken a different approach than the current law does. I would do more privacy laws for all social media and other rulings that would apply to all social media. I also would say, hey, China, you can have TikTok in the United States if you allow Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and all these other social media to be used for free, not paid free, but they can be not censored in China, which they currently are. And China always say, oh, they can be in China as long as they obey our laws, but your laws essentially neuter those social media platforms. So China can have TikTok all they want in here if we have reciprocal rights, our companies in China. And frankly, that'd be a better approach for all sorts of trade with China to make it more reciprocal rather than doing tariffs. So TikTok is a complicated issue, but the two big things are what we're doing right now, what the president and his administration are doing is breaking the law. And I think there's probably a better method for dealing with TikTok than what that law did.
I did not expect that question. That one came out of nowhere. That was a good one.
Well, I don't know. I've heard this term like the TikTokification of everything. And we talk about it indirectly, but I've seen these studies where young people, since we're talking about trying to bring young people into an industry, where the number one desired profession right now is, I guess, influencer or content creator, and that's fine, but very few people actually make a meaningful living off of that, and it just feels a bit exploitive as well on some of these social media apps. So that's where I went with it when we're trying to penetrate this group of people, this population. How do we get there? And I've heard a lot of people in our industry, in the maritime industry, say, well, we've got to turn to TikTok. That's where they are, which does make sense. I think that's a legitimate strategy, is like we should create content that we put up on TikTok and it gets people's attention. But as Sam's talking about, there's a downside to this as well, and I'm not sure that's something we want to be engaging in actively. So, I mean, that's where I went in my mind. It's like, and it's all related to me.
Are you on TikTok?
No, actually. No. I know, interesting, right? Yeah. I am the young person who sits around this table, but I'm not on TikTok.
Are you, Patrick?
I have the app. I haven't really looked at it though. I got it because I have two young daughters, and they were feeling pretty alienated by not having it. They're not on really any social media. And so I downloaded it because I was like, what is this? And to look at it and be like, why is this so scary? Why is this really addictive? All that kind of stuff. And I get it, because it's just this endless, you just keep going. And I do notice when I'm on it, it will, these very reinforcing things that it is tough to get off of it, which is why I don't look at it very often.
I'm not on TikTok. I mean, I see TikTok videos on other platforms, but my understanding is, that their algorithm is much better at being addictive than other platforms are, which is why it's so successful.
To me, this is directly related to the maritime industry because we surveyed our members last year. The number one issue they have, unanimous issue across, and we have a diverse membership, was workforce development. And everywhere I go, they say we have more work than we have workers right now. Everywhere I go, which is a great problem, but still it's a problem. It's a net drain. And they have people say, I hear this a lot, like a huge concern for young people coming on is, what's the Wi-Fi password? Or it's not the most convenient work, going 2 weeks on a tug crew and then 2 weeks off. It's not a standard type of job, and it's not as attractive. So I see it as, a problem. Like, how are we going to make it more attractive? What can we do? I think about this quite a lot. So
That's really interesting. Yeah. So when people are away from shore, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense that they want to have Wi-Fi so they can access all things they usually access. And I'm not on TikTok, but I access the internet every day and
Yeah.
use ChatGPT and all that.
Yeah.
And I like to watch my YouTube videos. But yeah, it's trying to attract workers is a different game now. I think the companies we talk about, hey, we can train them for the job. We need the community colleges and other colleges and trainers, and all the soft skills is what they want,
Mm-hmm.
including showing up for work,
That's a big one.
working hard, being able to communicate.
Yes.
That being said, because I do interact with students a lot, I find young people to be much better than my generation was at their age. I was at a friend's daughter's wedding a few weeks ago, and she and her now husband and their friends were fantastic. And she had written a handwritten personalized note to everybody who went to the wedding. So the note is an envelope, open an envelope. The note I got, just a beautiful note, was different than the note my wife got. Then was different than my friend got. I never even thought to have done that when I was her age. And so I think young people and different generations all have their challenges. I actually am much more up on younger generations than most people.
So am I. I'm right there with you. That's my opinion of younger generations as well. I think they've gotten a lot of criticism, these younger generations, that are completely undeserved. And while it may be true, some of these stereotypes that you hear, for some people, like, that's where the stereotype comes from, I just don't believe it as, like, an entire generation. That's not been my experience at all. Much more like what you're talking about, Sam, has been mine. I actually get a chance to meet, some really inspirational younger people, especially right in this state. A lot of state representatives are incredibly impressive people, and they just blow me away. And so that gives me actually a lot to look forward to and a lot of hope. I feel like, okay, we may go through a tough time. It may get dark. We may have to suffer a little bit, especially in this industry. But I honestly am very bullish on Washington Maritime. Even though it gets frustrating some days, these issues that we have, I look at it and I see just so much. It's just like, it just reeks of opportunity. And I feel like the more we can talk about that opportunity and excite people about it, I think that's what's going to make a real difference in this state. One thing I want to go back to that I loved, where I said, oh, we're taking that out, that I wouldn't mind hearing more about, and I've actually got like 5 or 6 things, but I'll try and go through it quickly. But one thing, I had this thought about the politicization, did I say that right, of energy. Like, why is batteries and solar powers like a liberal Democrat thing, and why is coal a Republican thing? I don't understand it. In my mind, it's just energy. It's agnostic. It doesn't care. But then I also understand, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that China is the global leader in renewable energy. Is that true?
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, and China is is making most of the batteries in the world and most of the solar panels in the world. And it's installed, I want to say last year, it installed more solar generation than the United States and Europe combined. But now remember, part of that is because China's really big.
Right.
They claim to be 1.4 billion people. I actually think it's probably less than that. I won't go into why now, but still, they are very big. Per capita, there's other countries that are doing more solar generation than China.
Okay.
But China is the manufacturer of these key inputs, and they're because of that they're also improving the technology. So the batteries are getting better, and each year as the Chinese battery companies improve them. They've got a car now that you can recharge the car battery in like 5 minutes or less.
I saw that.
So yeah,
Was it BYD?
BYD, that's right. Yeah,
Incredible.
I toured one of their factories many, many years ago.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, in I want to say it was in,
Oh.
but I'm forgetting at the moment. But the Warren Buffett was a big investor for them many years ago. So yeah, that's true. How this happened? So I think a mistake was made that when people use climate change to try and promote electric energy and batteries and solar power and wind power, because for whatever reason you had resistance against the climate change. I was going to say story, but the climate change fact. It's that some people either don't believe that climate change is happening or think it's not that big a deal. Regardless of whether climate change ever happened, abundant energy is a game changer for economies and for really militaries and for being strategically important. So even if we weren't dealing at all with climate change, and to be clear, we are, but even if we weren't, being able to develop abundant energy is a game changer. So if you can continue to improve solar power efficiency and better battery storage that's affordable, you can even do things like salination, so you can take salt water and get clean water, which will be huge in the Gulf states in the Middle East, or you could be heated for us here with a large coast. And you can do all sorts of other things to create. So we have an induction oven we bought a couple years ago. My wife wanted to get it because she was worried about natural gas. She was worried about natural gas ovens and the leakage and everything. But it's actually much better for cooking, we've discovered.
Mine just broke this morning.
Did it really? Oh, no.
Yeah, just this morning.
Hopefully ours lasts a long time. So I can't come over for dinner tonight then, I guess. And there's this new, I forget the name of the company, but there's a new one it's going to be even better than induction oven. And it's basically using the power of a battery that is now cheaper, and you can heat things and to be more accurate with your cooking. So that, and then that's just one thing, a oven and stove. You kind of multiply that for all these other things you can do with the abundant energy. And that's what we should be concentrating on. I would, if I was in charge of the Democratic Party, and thank God I'm not, and they say the same thing, I think, but I would really change the message to we have all this abundant energy that allows us to do all these great things and build all these great things and do all these cool things. That's the message I think would be much more successful, but both here and really around the world.
Yeah.
Right. On the note of abundant energy, you have sparked alternative fuels in maritime. How does that play in? Surely you are keeping track of what's going on, and obviously it's on the top of everybody's minds. Thoughts, input. Are we going to put solar panels on ships?
So I'm not an expert in it, but I have the last couple of years done some stuff with some folks where we were doing meetings in Europe on one of my side consulting gigs. And so we looked a lot at hydrogen, and we looked at ammonia-based fuels. And one of the things we heard in these meetings is, besides airplanes, probably ships are the last thing that'll get electrified. It's just such a big vehicle, or at least the big container ships will be the last thing that get electrified, because it's hard to get you have to really improve the batteries and the solar to really make that more viable. So yeah, people have been looking at these other things. We looked at some smaller, much smaller than container ships, where they've on hydrogen of different types. It's still early in its technology evolution, I think, but hopefully there's a lot of people working on it, and a lot in places like Denmark, the Netherlands. I don't know as much about where China is doing on that. So that's something actually I need to look into more. But you're seeing a lot in certain parts of Europe, partly because they care about the environment quite a bit there. And then there's some shipbuilding expertise there. You also have Maersk, which is a big shipping line headquartered in Copenhagen. So there's a lot of stuff happening there. It's not ready for prime time yet, at least as of a year ago when I was last there meeting with them. But I still try and keep an eye on it. But there's a lot of people working on it, and I think they will. Now, whether that will ever be able to get to electrified container ships, I don't know. Hopefully so. I know. There's all sorts of different routes you can take, including, you can even do sort of, everyone gets scared of the word, but you can maybe do some nuclear stuff as well. So there's lots of smart people working on it. I would guess it's a number of years away from really being ready for prime time, but hopefully it happens sooner than later. And if we get some breakthroughs with some of these other areas, that will hopefully happen. They're doing. There's a whole sustainable fuels effort at Payne Field for aircraft, and a lot of these things you can learn from each other on it. Airplane obviously is not a ship, but there might be some things we can learn from each other. And if you congregate the expertise, there's often lots of spillover effects. So if you get a lot of experts doing things up in Snohomish County, then that can spill over to doing. People start their own business and start trying to do. I could apply this for the maritime side as well. So we'll see. I'm hopeful. Unfortunately, unlike some things where you're seeing it happen now with the ovens and other things, I think we're a few years away, maybe for the big container, certainly for the big container ships.
Well, Sam, we're coming to our time, but we have a couple more questions that we ask everybody, and so I'm really curious to hear this. But what is something that makes you rage, like something that we need to pay way more attention to that we're not? And then on the flip side, what's something where we're all losing our minds, and maybe we should just chill out a little bit about it?
That's a good question. I don't know if it makes me rage, but I think that's something that's underlooked at is what's happening in India. People keep talking this is going to be the China century. Maybe it'll be the China half century, but I think there's a good chance that India it'll be the India century eventually. It's larger, bigger population than China now. It's starting to develop pretty well. It is also a democracy. So earlier I was talking about what's going to happen with Vietnam. Will it democratize or will it follow the China model? Well, India is the largest democracy in the world. Like any democracy, they have their challenges. But if India continues to get their act together and develop and get more manufacturing. So, for example, Apple is now making a lot of iPhones in India, and a bunch of other companies are making stuff there. If it continues to develop, it'll be good for the world, especially as America has ceded its leadership role in the world. And while we're still a democracy, we're not the beacon of democracy, I think, around the world that we once were. So I think it's really important for India to become a more important part of the world and be successful economically and politically. And also, there's a stat I always love is 1 out of 5 people under the age of 25 in the world is Indian. They may not all be living in India. There's a lot of folks from India living here. A friend of mine who lives on the east side sees all the cricket fields over there. It's Indian Americans living there. But again, yeah, so really 20% of the world under age 25 are Indian. So it's going to have a huge effect economically, politically, culturally. I don't get angry about it. I'm actually the opposite. I'm excited, hopefully, that to see. I think it's undercovered what's happening with India and how important it might be going forward. And what was the other one?
What's something that everyone's kind of losing their minds over right now that maybe we should just chill out a little bit? It's going to be okay.
That's a great question. What do I? I get upset about the Mariners, and I should get upset about the Mariners. I do an annual Seattle Mariner rant on Facebook. I haven't done it yet this season, but
Not yet, but
we
it's
would
coming.
gladly welcome it here on this platform.
I can come back for that. Well, I mean, maybe going back to immigration, I think people get really upset about immigrants. I mean, again, the truth is that they commit crimes at a much lower rate than native-born Americans. They've been a huge. So there's a lot of things about America that I think have been great, and over the last 250 years, we helped lead democracy, and we're a model for democracy. But I think the thing that really distinguishes America more than any other thing and makes us the success we've been in the world is our relative success at assimilating immigrants into our country, because immigrants have been such a success for the entire time, right? So the first people that came to the United States
Built
were
on
immigrants.
immigrants.
Yeah, exactly. And that something like 50% of the CEOs and the founders in Silicon Valley are immigrants. A lot of the founders here in the Puget Sound area are immigrants. They inject new life into our country and have for our entire 250 years. And they are not a danger to our country. Though I will say, I read something a number of years ago, I think I actually included this in my book as well. The way to deal with people who are uncomfortable with immigrants is not to say, you should really enjoy this different culture and these different people. The way to get people coming around immigrants is they're essentially just like you and me. They want to raise their kids. They want to have a successful career, hopefully in supply chains and maritime. They're really just the same. I like to ride my bike a lot, and I was riding my bike the other day and was slowing down as I got near my house, and there's these immigrants who were loading a bike into their car, and we all just stopped and talked for a few minutes. Or another time I was on a walk. This made me feel good and bad at the same time. I was on a walk around dusk trying to figure something out, and this guy drove and he stopped, and he presumably was an immigrant because he had an accent and it looked different than I do, but he was really worried about coyotes. He's seen 2 coyotes nearby, and he was worried I was going to get attacked by these coyotes. So I felt bad because he felt like I was not capable of defending myself against coyotes. But I felt good that here's someone just trying to, look out for another human being. So.
Thank you, Sam. This has been great.
Awesome.
This was what I was hoping for. Like, you really delivered.
We've
Thanks.
been waiting for
Yeah.
a guest like you to ask. these
I'd love to
questions.
have you on again and maybe like some updates, especially, 6 months, 12 months
Yeah.
from now to see like where we're at. That would be really great for us. But
Happy to do so.
you're
Yeah,
very
thanks for having me.
you're a very thoughtful person. I enjoyed your book tremendously.
Thank you for reading it. I really
Yeah.
appreciate
For
it.
those who want to read it, can you tell us what it is and just a quick overview? We actually haven't said it
that's right.
specifically yet.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
You want me to do it?
Yes,
So it's
please do.
called Challenging China, Smart Strategies for Dealing with China in the Xi Jinping Era. I wrote it, it came out in 2021, so I wrote it a little bit before then, but I think a lot of it still stands up. And I tried to write it not in an academic way and to be entertaining. It's a lot of it I think still applies, and China is still a challenge to the world. I think, unfortunately, America in some ways is now a challenge to the world as well, which is different than when I wrote the book. Hopefully it'll give people a fun way to learn about what's going on in China and ways to deal with some of the difficulties of China.
It's very accessible. Like, yeah, it's one of those books where when I read it, like, I think it made me feel smarter than I am. One of those where you're like, oh yeah, I can follow this, And I know it's a very complex and dense topic, but I really like your writing style.
Thank you.
And I pay attention to that kind of stuff because I try to think of myself a bit as a writer, and
Cool.
so I try to gravitate to certain styles, and yours was definitely good for me, so I appreciate that.
Thanks very much.
And I'm going to ask you to sign it when we're done.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Even though
I'm
you
very
already
honored.
wrote all over it.
I write on some of my
ridiculous.
books. I'm doing research on something where I'm writing on my book, so I have no problem with her writing
We're
on
gonna
my
run a
book.
poll in this episode. Do you write in your books or not? Put your input in the comments wherever you're seeing this video.
So when you were in school, you didn't underline stuff in your books? No. Or highlight? No.
Sarah,
Christine.
it's your book.
I know, but here I am. I'm like in my Gen Z brain. I'm like, well, but what about you? Patrick said, okay, guys. Patrick said that he will take pages and cut pieces out of his
Yeah.
book to put somewhere else, and I think that's crazy.
Because it needs to go in my book.
But I guess I'm just like I'm thinking of the next reuse of the book immediately when it's my book, but I'm thinking of the next use of the book. And if you've taken a page out, that's just me. That's just me.
It's very thoughtful.
All right, again, your poll, put it down there, please. All right, we got to get some hot takes. With that, the last question is just where can people keep up with you? You mentioned your blog, newsletter, but whatever else you'd like to share, where can they find you and your things?
So I have my International Need to Know newsletter. You can Google it. It's on Substack now, but also I do it two ways. But yeah, Google International Need to Know Sam Kaplan. You can find it, and please sign up. I try and make that fun as well, not just dry information. Our Center of Excellence has a quarterly newsletter called The Chain, where we just focus on stuff dealing with workforce development and trade and supply chain sector. We do try to make that fun as well. And I speak at different things around town and sometimes in other parts of the country.
Amazing. And you're on LinkedIn. Are you a big user? We're
I
big
am on
users.
LinkedIn,
so
yeah.
can people find you there, message you things?
You can. In fact, I post a link to my newsletter on there and other things
Great.
on there.
There you go.
It's much better than TikTok.
Much better than TikTok. Yeah.
Definitely different. All right. Well, I think with that, we're going to close out this special episode of the Maritime Morning Brief. Thank you so much for coming to join us, Sam. This was fantastic.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm
Yeah.
always willing to talk somewhere.
Of course.
Yeah, we'd like to. It'd be great to have you back.
Yep. We're going to check in on that for
Yeah.
sure. And for all you online, I look forward to seeing you all again bright and early tomorrow morning.